Welcome to Art Ed Radio, the podcast for art teachers. This show is produced by the Art of Education, and I'm your host, Tim Bogatz. How did you find artists when you first started teaching about art or teaching about art history? Maybe you just went with the artists that you remembered from your own art history classes. Or maybe you just picked a poster that was on the wall. Okay? Most of us started there, and that's fine. Okay? But at some point in your teaching career, something shifts. You start to realize that the artists that you bring into your classroom are not just decoration. You're not just teaching them because you have to or you should, or because those are the artists that you learned about when you were a student. Okay? Instead, those artists that you bring in are part of the story that you're telling your students, part of your curriculum, part of what you're teaching them about what art is and who gets to make it and why it matters. And that's what today's conversation is going to be about. My guest will be Kelly Hatton. Kelly is a curriculum designer for Flex and Pro here at the Art of Education. Kelly was an art teacher in Memphis, Tennessee, became a district admin overseeing a bunch of art teachers, and has been with the Art of Ed for the past few years doing a lot of great things. And I wanted to have her on because she thinks deeply about artists, not just how we find them, but also how we choose them and how we make sure the artists we teach reflect the full and rich world that our students live in. And so I want to ask Kelly about how she discovers new artists, whether that is just the Instagram feed that we've curated or visiting museums or whatever it may be. And I also want to ask her about how the Art of Ed decides which artist bios to develop for Flex, and how we decide there which artists are important. And I think I also want to talk to her about those really big questions of, do you have to choose between teaching historic artists and contemporary artists? Can you balance it? And I want to get her perspective on how we can best do that. So really looking forward to this conversation, really looking forward to talking to Kelly. So let me bring her on now. Kelly Hatton is joining me now. Kelly, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Yes, I love it. And we're getting into summer, which is a wonderful thing. We have lots of cool things to talk about with artists and art history and a lot of fun stuff. Before we get in there, since this is your first time on the show, we would love an introduction. So can you tell us about whatever you want to tell us, who you are, anything about your life, your teaching, what you do now at the Art of Ed?
Yes. All right. My name is Kelly Hatton, as you said. I live in Memphis, Tennessee. I've got a husband, an 11-year-old daughter who's about to go to middle school. And I kind of got into art education a roundabout way. I initially went to college, I actually started out pre-med, if you can believe that.
Wow.
Yeah, very different path I'm on now, and actually switched my major to communications and got into photography at the very end of that. And that led me to wanting to pursue art. And so I eventually made my way to Memphis to go to Memphis College of Art and study art and photography, and really loved being in Memphis and wanted to find a job that kept me here, and was lucky that our state at the time was mandating elementary visual art in all elementary schools. So they had to hire like 100 teachers in one summer. And if you had a degree in art, you could have a job. And I had no experience. So that alternative licensure pathway was thrown into an elementary classroom. Had no idea what I was doing. But turns out, like, teaching, I was pretty good at it, and I liked it, and had a lot of support at that time, because there were so many of us in that similar boat. We had a lot of support to get going, and I eventually became a mentor teacher for our district, led professional development and workshops and things like that. And then eventually, after 10 years in the classroom, I got the job as the district administrator for visual art and theater, which was amazing. I had about 200 teachers that I was
Wow.
serving at the time. And then the pandemic came, and lots of things happening around that time. And then I was so lucky to get the position at the Art of Ed, and so that's where I am now. I'm a curriculum designer for Flex and Pro.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I want to talk to you a little bit later about Flex and Pro, but I also want to talk about artists and the artists that we show our students. So, thinking back to when you first started teaching, how did you decide which artists you wanted to show your students or what you wanted to teach them? And I guess second part of that, like did that approach change for you over time? Like as you got further into your teaching career, did it change, how you decided which artists you wanted to show and what topics you wanted to teach?
Yes, definitely. Like I said, I was thrown into the classroom, and so I relied a lot on just the artists I knew and liked.
Yes.
There wasn't a lot of thought or intention going into it, like I said, there were so many of us at the same time, so we relied on each other for
Mhm.
lesson plans and, whatever PD I was going to that I learned about, but there was not a lot of proactive sort of learning on my part.
Yeah, mine was very much the reproductions that the teacher left for
Yes,
me who was there before. It's like, well,
100%.
I guess we're teaching about this artist because I
I'm
have a
glad you
poster.
mentioned that. Yes, we had, like I said, we had all this support at the beginning. So we had these like giant textbooks, which, you kind of used, kind of
Right.
didn't. But yes, the art prints, that
Yes.
was pretty much it. That was how I decided. And I mean, they were some great
Can
prints,
I
but
interrupt? Sorry. For all of you, mid-20s teachers who don't know about these things. Every art teacher used to have a collection of prints or posters, I don't know, kind of like a tag board sort of weight with famous huge prints of all sorts of different paintings. And so if you're lucky, you had a good variety, but I feel like every teacher had at least like the 6 pack or the 12 pack of just Van Gogh's irises and just,
exactly.
the most canon paintings you can think of. But every teacher used to have a collection of these that they could hold up in front of the class and use to teach. So if you are a new teacher and have no idea what we're talking about, that's kind of what they look
Yeah,
like.
I mean, gosh, things have come a long way. So, yeah, now it's very different. Back then, Instagram was maybe a thing, but it is not what it is now.
Yeah,
So, you didn't have that pathway or really social
right.
media in general. So now I'm not big on social media, but Instagram's really the only place I'm active in. I use it. I mean, I've curated my feed to be mostly artists, other art teachers, museums, curators, writers, lots of interior designers too. I've got
Yeah.
some really awesome designers that I follow who are very into art, and so I'll find out about artists there. But yes, again during the pandemic, I feel like that was the starting point of just all I did was find artists and start
Yeah.
following them, and that's just expanded. Years later, other ways to find artists are, just what's trending. Like who do we have on Art Ed now?
Hmm.
Who are the NAEA keynotes? Of course, if you go to NAEA, you're being exposed to lots of other art teachers and artists there. And then, yeah, like in the work that I do at AOE, where I am writing artist bios, I'm writing about artists that I've never heard of sometimes, or
Yeah.
artists that I've heard of, but not really, gotten into their work. And I learn a lot there. And it definitely, if it's anywhere I am, especially like museums or these keynotes, if they are a living practicing artist, I would go straight to Instagram. Like, do they have a
Right.
presence there? They're on my they're in my feed now. So I feel
Yeah.
like I'm staying up on what's going
No,
on.
that's good. And, You and I have talked before about just once you get that algorithm trained, like you
Mhm.
find new artists and that gets you to explore more artists, and it's just sort of this self-perpetuating loop, and you can really run into some great things eventually. But I actually wanted to ask you about the flip side of that first, because I'm curious for you, like how much does the physical world factor in, like looking at paintings in real life? Do you find yourself discovering artists through museum visits or just local galleries or even art fairs that you go to? Like how much does that play a part for you?
A lot. And yeah, you can be on Instagram all you want, but like seeing this stuff in real life is most impactful. So whenever I'm traveling, I make a point to go to a museum in that city, especially if it's a new city. I really love that. I will try to make it. So I'm in Memphis, as I mentioned, try at least once a year to get over to Crystal Bridges, which is in
Mm,
Bentonville, Arkansas. And that's like
yeah.
a 5 to 6 hour drive for me. And I think it's one of the best. I mean, definitely in this region, it's just amazing. And then there's the Momentary next door where you'll find more like performance-based artists, installations, and things like that. I got
Mm,
I got to see a huge Nick Cave installation there.
love it.
So that's a fave. Locally, I have, lucky to have really great museums here. So also supporting my local museums with memberships. And then I've also been lucky to see some artist talks locally. So that's something too to just kind of keep your eye on things that are happening, join your local museums and then go to those artist talks. I got to see Hank Willis Thomas speak
Oh wow.
several years ago, and
Love
I'm
his
like a
work.
huge
Yes.
fan. Um, and also was very lucky to meet Bisa Butler when she
Well,
came
that's
to Memphis.
amazing. Yeah.
And she did a very intimate artist talk here. I guess it's been a year or two. So seeing seeing artwork in person definitely. And like I mentioned, if I find something that moves me in a museum, I'm taking pictures of it. I'm
Right.
then going to Instagram and saying like, okay, are they on there so I can just follow them? So yeah, I think that is huge, and I've found a lot of artists that way. I wanted to mention too with Instagram, just like artists like Derek Forge and a lot of these artists like we've then written bios on.
Mm-hmm.
So like Derek Forjor, he's actually from Memphis, practicing in New York, and he has a program here for high school artists that he
Oh
take
wow.
like every summer. I think he takes artists, young artists, to New York, and they get to tour studios and stuff. So like, yeah, people like that. I'm just trying to kind of keep them on my radar, but like Kadir Nelson, Deborah Roberts, Bisa Butler, those are people I've found either on Instagram or in museums, and then have like, sometimes I'll get to advocate for a specific artist bio, or it's just someone who I'll immediately start following what they're doing. And I will say too, like people who are finding these artists and, maybe you're bringing them into your classroom making artwork, like a lot of them really love to be tagged on Instagram, and they
Yeah.
will share like, Bisa Butler will share your students' work.
Love it.
Vanessa German has shared, like, my museum visit, in the past, so it's like it's really cool to just put yourself out there that like that.
Well, and kids love that interaction too. If you just tell them, "Hey, Bisa Butler, like my post on Instagram," like
Yeah,
that
it's
goes a little
huge.
ways. So I
Yeah.
love that. Okay, so I wanted to ask you too about artist bios. I know you do a lot with Flex Curriculum. There are hundreds of artist bios that the Art of Ed has, and so I was hoping you could give us a little behind the scenes insight. You said you've advocated for writing some, but like how are those decisions made? Like how do you decide when there needs to be a new artist added or a new bio written? And like, do those museum visits, do you ever go back to the team and just say, I saw this new person, we have to have an artist bio for this person? Like is that ever happening?
Yeah, it happens sometimes. There's been times in the past that we've decided like we really want to make sure that we have more representation across like every state. So we've like made a point to make sure that there are artists in Flex, that every student, no matter where they are, can sort of feel that relevance from someone who like came from where they are. So, and of course, we are very committed to having a diverse variety of artists from different races and cultures and countries. And so, it is always a work in progress. It's, no, I would say curriculum is ever like 100% perfect, but so we're always constantly striving for that. One thing, I mentioned before, like artists who are trending. So, when Art Ed Now releases a new sort of keynote, we will try to support the teachers who are attending those with new bios. And then a lot of it too comes from like what our customers are searching for.
Oh, yeah.
We are, thankfully able to see like artists or teachers are going into the platform and searching for a particular artist. And so we make note of those artists they're looking for that we don't have yet. And that may be a contemporary artist or a historical artist, either or. But yeah, I would say the most recent instance I can think of where I was like, we need an artist bios. It was for a specific lesson that was actually kind of inspired by this, loosely inspired by the artist. Her name is Rachel Burke, and she's on Instagram as iMakestagram, and she takes kids' craft materials and does like really fun, colorful, amazing things with it. And so we created a lesson recently that was using perler beads to make like vessels, and she calls them melty beads. But so that was like she's Australian, so that was one place where I was like, this is a great connection to have her in there. And plus, I knew like the type of art that she creates would be very, I think, attractive to, students now. So it's been really fun.
Now, zooming back out, big picture question for you. How important is it, just in your opinion, that the artists that we teach, the artists that we present in our classroom are relevant or contemporary versus those artists that are historically significant? Like, how do you find the balance, or do you try to strike a balance between the two?
Yeah, I don't think you should ever really have to like make a choice between the two. In fact, I think that they work best together. Those historical artists give us, give students that context and vocabulary over time, and help students see that, this is a conversation that's been going on for centuries. Contemporary artists, I think, make the conversation feel more relevant and alive. So, like I've mentioned a lot, students can go and follow those living artists. They can watch interviews. They can sometimes see the work being made right now. And so I think one of the best ways to approach it is to pair them. Here's a historical artist and here's someone working today who's either responding to the same concepts or themes, or even using the same media, or pushing back against, that historical tradition. And I would say a good question to always ask is like, who has been left out of the historical canon and why? Who has gotten to choose who those quote unquote master artists are. And I think, it's just a natural connection to, bring the past and the present together.
I think that's a good way to put it. And like you said, there's a balance, there's a conversation to be had. And, like you said, a lot of times those contemporary artists can be an entry point into talking about art history, into showing how people have done things in the past. So I always appreciate that. One last question for you. If you could give some advice to a new teacher who wants to build a more dynamic curriculum or wants to incorporate more art history, they may or may not have those reproductions from 25 years ago in their room. Like, what would be your advice there? Or I guess too, sorry, this is going to be a long one. Other end of the spectrum, for experienced teachers, like, what do you think our goals should be? Like, when we're talking about artists, what should we want our students to walk away with from those conversations or those lessons?
Yeah, for the new teacher, I would say, just get inspired. Where I started was just like, this is what I know, which was very limited. But now, you have the world at your fingertips. You can find inspiration in so many places. And, leading with artists, connecting artists to, the concepts in media that you're already planning to teach, just can come very naturally. But, a compelling human story is always going to be a really engaging entry point for you and for your students. And don't feel like you have to have like a perfect roster of artists. You can start small just by bringing in, one or two new artists and build from there. And always too, ask. It's good to know your students and ask them what they're interested in, who they're interested in. I mean, they may surprise you.
Yeah.
The artists that they've seen or even just like the media they're interested in can help a lot. For the experienced teachers, again, it doesn't matter how experienced you are. I don't believe the perfect curriculum exists. Like, like it's always can be better.
Yes.
And always can be improved. So it's less about, coverage than impact. So like it's not about how many artists your students can name, it's really about like helping them ask the right questions and, like who made this, why, and for whom,
Right.
Look at your full year roster and ask what story it tells collectively. Sometimes you can see where those gaps are. There are tools like you can find to help you check, sort of audit your curriculum to see how inclusive it is. But I would say for both teachers, for all teachers, one big thing is providing, whatever artist it is, if you can give them primary sources, so showing the artist talking about their work firsthand, or showing them. Now, definitely always check the artist's website first before you send students to it, but they always have an artist statement. So I think that that's a great pathway, especially if you are working with older students. I don't think there's an artist website out there that doesn't have an artist statement. So that's a good way to like encourage your students to think that way about their own art. And then, just modeling curiosity yourself, like when you're discovering new artists, which, you should be doing that too.
Right.
Like you're sharing that and, helping your students see that engaging with art history is, a lifelong practice, not just like a checklist.
Yeah, and I think that if you're excited about that, if you're passionate about that, that's going to pass along to your students too. Like
Yep.
that excitement is contagious. And,
Yep.
that's something I've talked about on the podcast before, but I really do think it's true. So if you're excited about an artist, a lot of times your students will be excited about discovering that as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Well, Kelly, thank you so much. Really enjoyed talking to you. Appreciate all your opinions, all your insights, and thank you for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you to Kelly for coming on. I love that conversation. And I think the thing that sticks with me the most out of all of that was that phrase that she used about it's less about coverage than it is about impact. We can get caught up spending time worrying about how many artists we can squeeze into a school year, how many art movements we can check off the list. And Kelly is just kind of here to remind us that none of that really matters if your students aren't actually connecting with the work. And you want them to be curious, you want them to be asking questions, and you want them to be feeling like the art world has something to do with them. And that is the real goal. And Kelly had some great advice there. And if I can just add a little bit to that, like if you're thinking about what you can do next year, here's where I would start. Pick one artist that you've never taught before, preferably somebody who's living, somebody who's working right now, and find a way to bring them into your classroom. Follow them on social media, look up their artist statement like Kelly suggested, see if there's a video of them talking about their work, those primary sources that Kelly talked about. there's no need to overhaul your entire curriculum. Just start with one. And if it can help, you can check out the artist bios in Flex. Kelly and the team have put a lot of thought into building a collection. Like she said, it's diverse, it's relevant, it is genuinely useful. And so we have some links to some really good resources in the show notes there. All right, thank you again to Kelly for joining me. It was a fantastic conversation, and hopefully we can talk to her again soon. And hopefully she has given you either the inspiration or the guide to how to discover some new artists, find out how they're going to resonate with your students, and bring them into your classroom. We are so glad you joined us for today's episode, and we hope it was helpful for you. If you know someone else who might be helped with the information in this show, we would love for you to share it with them. We also appreciate all the ratings and reviews that listeners leave for us, so if you have a few seconds to give us a 5-star rating or even leave a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen, we would love to see it. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you next week.